Right, here we are. Pitch Invasion, brilliant book, again, but completely different from Lulu's. And we're going to dig into it. So tell us a little bit about yourself first, just briefly, and your connection to Sussex.
My name's Karen and I live in Lewes and I've lived here for 18 years now. So that's my connection to Sussex really. Significantly for the book, I never liked football, not at all. And I was originally a fashion model and then a counsellor working in the music industry where I set up a counselling service for PolyGram Records. And then I sort of parent governor at an alternative school in Lewes for a while. And then I was writing and then I got involved in football. Yay!
Quite unexpected, but we're not going that way yet. We're going to talk about the book and the process of the book first. And you thought it would be a couple of weeks to write this book. What was it? How long did it actually?
Okay, let me just defend myself slightly. I thought it would be a couple of weeks because I had done so many talks about myself and my journey in football that I thought, I was very familiar with my own story and that I could put it all together. And all I had to do was go through some diaries and sort of emails and I'd have a book. But it did take me longer. Yeah, no, it's true. Yeah. I loved it. I loved writing this book. I found it so interesting to find out more about the world of publishing. And also, I really, really like being on my own with words in a room and trying to make them get into an order that will make the most sense for the most people. It's like a puzzle that I really, really enjoy. So it was like a luxury to write a book. I loved it. But the process of getting it published, shall I mention that? I have to get back slightly into football for that because I started a competition at Lewes FC called the Rooker Prize, loosely based on the Booker Prize, except you only had to write the first 250 words of your novel. And when I stepped down from the board, I had more time. And so I decided to get this prize sponsored. And I wrote to major publishing houses and the CEO of Hachette got back to me and said, yeah, love this. And I got them to give us a session with the winner with a top editor. There's a prize money can't buy. And I then took the winner to Hachette UK. And while they were having their session, I was chatting to the head of comms there. And I told her all about Equality FC because I'm really, really passionate about gender equality in football, as you will find. We'll get into that in a minute. And I was telling her, and I was saying, we need this and we need that. And she said, somebody should write a book about this. I said, that's so funny because I've just started to write one. And this is true. And it's so jammy. And she said, well, have you got an agent? And I said, do I need one? She said, yes, because if you don't have an agent, your publisher could just write any old contract and you wouldn't know. So I said, well, how do I get an agent? And I'm asking the head of comms, at Hachette. And she says, well, I'll put you in touch with one of our editors and he can put you in touch with agents that he uses. So it was an amazing stroke of luck in a way. And so she did that. In publishing, things move so slowly. In football, people get back to you straight away. Like they ring you or they text you or they email you the same day or they've forgotten about it. Publishing, you can wait weeks before you get an email back. So I learned this and the editor got in touch with me. He put me in touch with an agent. Then I had loads of conversations with this lovely young man called Nick, who I didn't really know was my agent. I thought I had to wait until we'd signed something or it was official. But he was ever so diplomatic and polite on the phone. And I really wasn't used to it, And we were kind of going around corners about, what this book might be and how to write a book proposal. That took me probably longer than writing the book. And and then we got the proposal right. He sent it to about 5 publishers. And then Octopus Books, which Cassell is a division of, I had this sort of meeting with them about who the book was for. Well, they said, who is it aimed at? And I said, well, you could aim it at a man's head when he starts talking about football. But they said, so we decided it was aimed to women, in fact. who had experienced inequality in some way. So, and they took it on. Yeah, they offered me a contract, so that was brilliant. That was the process. Oh, and then there was editing. To be really honest with you, before I even had finished it, and before I'd written the proposal, I met an amazing woman in Lewes called Susanna Waters, who is an editor. She's formerly an opera singer, but now she's an editor and a writer. And she had a look at it for me, because originally it was called Mismatch of the Day. And yeah, it was quite fun. And she thought that Mismatch of the Day, she said it's too much, using men's words for a woman. And she gave me so much good advice about what she thought the core of the book was. And she was an amazing person to work with in the first instance before I even proposed the book to Hachette. And then they gave me a sort of copy editor, and their head of commissions, Trev just gave me a little bit of feedback on the book. But it's not like writing fiction where you work with an editor very closely. When you write non-fiction, it's more, can you swap those two chapters round and make the ending a bit more positive? And that was about it. Yeah.
Let's get into football, shall we? Yeah, we're very aligned with a lot, but you know what the big difference is between you and me? I actually did play football, which you didn't.
Never have.
No. So very briefly, we can read all about the journey here, and it is absolutely fantastic. And obviously, Charlie's sitting down there. He was with you very early on and led the way into football. Tell us briefly how it happened.
So as I said, I really, it wasn't just that I didn't like football. I actually hated it, because when I grew up, it was the boys that took over the whole playground playing football. We were confined to the margins of a playground playing hopscotch, whatever. And then all I saw was men behaving badly on the back pages and the front pages of newspapers. On the TV, it was just men playing football. There was nothing there for me. I lived near Wembley growing up, and I couldn't get the tube if there was a match on because it was threatening. There were guys kind of really, drunk out of their heads, shouting. And if you were a young woman or a girl or a woman, you were at risk, I think. So I just associated football with all the worst kind of behaviour. Overpaid stars in jacuzzis, as I say in my book. And the only place for women was as a wag, an accessory to the main event. So I wanted nothing to do with it, thank you very much, really didn't like it. Then you mentioned Charlie. So when I started to go out with Charlie, poor Charlie's here tonight, he's my husband. When I started to go out with him, one day he said to me, I've got tickets. He was a big football fan. I've got tickets for an event at Wembley. Now, I was training to be a counsellor at this point in West London, and I just thought he knew me enough to know that I wouldn't want to go. It must be Take That we were going to. I thought we were going to Take That, right? So I come out of college and I'm meeting him at Wembley Park, and he takes me to England versus USA, right? And it is so boring. I can't even, right? There's all these men with plastic cups of beer. We're watching from the gods, these people running around a pitch down there. I don't know what the rules are. I'm not interested. There's a bit of a sort of language. Like what? I didn't like it at all. And then the next time I was at Wembley was, of course, getting Lewes FC women into the championship, because I was being interviewed by the FA to make a good case for them. So a lot happened in between those times to get me from really not liking football to being instrumental in in the women's game in terms of gender equality. Yeah.
I wanted to go back to the beginning, really, and talk about what happened in 1921 and what effect it had on football in general. So you may know about this, or you may not know about this. So let's hear what they did.
When I found out that Lewes FC was proposing to pay the women the same as the men, and I didn't even know at that point that women played football, I was gobsmacked that I didn't know. And also I wondered why they didn't get the same crowds as men. And that was the reason, by the way, that they were never or still aren't paid the same. People will argue that they don't deserve to be paid the same because they don't get the same attendances. So who's going to see the sponsors on their shirts? you know. So I went to a match and I thought it was amazing. I thought it was women being visible, taking up space, shouting at each other to do teamwork, being really strong and powerful, in a public place, performing in this way, agents of their own bodies. They weren't ornaments, they weren't decorations, they were there for themselves, wanted the ball, they were focused. I was blown away. I thought, I had never known this existed for women. I didn't know that I could come and watch this. I knew I was invited to a men's match if I wanted to, but I didn't want to. This was something with a totally different meaning and purpose for me as a woman. So I thought it was amazing. So I had to find out the history of this and why I hadn't known about it. And what I found out was that during the war, the First World War, women's football had taken off because women were working in factories, making munitions, making parachutes for the war effort, and men had gone to war. And factory started to play factory, and at first they were ridiculed for it, but eventually became very popular. And by the time the men came back from the war, in a nutshell, the women were getting much greater crowds than the men. The men couldn't get the same crowds back. The FA had a 15-minute meeting, the all-male FA, and they banned women from playing football. They said it was quite unsuitable for women. They got a doctor to say that gynecologically it was bad for us to play football. So I found this out, and indeed women were banned. They were banned from playing with FA coaches or with on FA-affiliated pitches, which was effectively squashed the game and the hopes and passions of so many women at that time. And therefore, culturally, going forward, all the great iconic moments of football, you might have heard of Bobby Moore, and you might have, all the years of pain that the men's team have experienced, right? You might have heard of all of that. It was a complete monopoly just for men. Women's football had been completely sidelined in every way. So broadcasting rights, where all the money is, had been taken over by men whilst they had the monopoly. And we didn't know about it. I didn't know. I wasn't aware. So 1971, they lift the ban. But unfortunately, they don't put any resource into women playing football. So I know that in 1971, I wouldn't have thought as a girl of playing football. It wasn't available. I would play netball. So no help was given.
Chapter 7 here, being a football fan, you say you can't be what you can't see. So I think that reflects that quite well, doesn't it? Marion Wright Edelman. And I wonder if you would read just a bit here about what we were supposed to do.
Oh, this is part of a talk I was giving. And I said, I could feel my own anger about the pressure to be well behaved and modest when I was young, praised for being quiet, looking pretty, doing homework, caring for others, but never for being strong or speaking out and up, making my own decisions, or for any kind of physical ability. I had done these unpraiseworthy things, either by the by or against the odds, but they weren't what I'd learned to value myself for. I grew up independent in many ways and risked being unappealing, going against the grain by taking time to swim regularly or leaving home aged 18 to go to another country and taking jobs wherever, but I never would have shouted about these things.
And then you were drawn into Lewes Football Club more and more.
Yes.
What was the driving force, do you think? Was it this?
It was anger.
It was just anger.
Anger is such a good thing. Right? It's so motivating. And I was lucky enough, as you know, to have my menopause on a football club board, which really helped. So I don't know, I was really cross. My daughter was about 17, 18 when I first came across Lewes FC Women and all her friends and everything. My son was younger. And I had had enough, really. I had been a fashion model and that had been very useful. It was for money. But obviously, what are you doing, right? You are being used for what you look like. No one cares what you think or say. In fact, you know, that's literally what you're paid for. Then in counselling, I have been very nurturing with people, and I still, find that a very useful job. I'm not putting it down. But, that was being there for other people, really. And I kind of had enough of that. And I get into football, find it very male-dominated, find all these young women who have put up with crumbs from the men's table for so long and overcome so much, and yet they're playing in the third and then the second highest tier of English women's football, and they're grateful for every kind of morsel that they get, and they don't get much, you know. And I was pissed off. I was really pissed off. I could see how unfair it was. I could see that it was wrong, and I could see that people making the decisions were men, and that this was unfair and nothing was going to change. And I was so grateful to Lewes for pioneering the Equal Pay Initiative. So this chapter is called Unwelcome Women, and this is a phrase we coined to explain what it was like for women in football. They'd never been welcome, but they didn't know that they were unwelcome. I didn't know that I'd been unwelcome until Lewes introduced gender equality. So people seemed generally impressed that women footballers at Lewes would be paid the same as men, have the same marketing resources behind them, benefit from the same standard of coaching, and continue to play on the same pitch in their hometown. And at the same time, the men wouldn't lose out because directors had agreed to take the hit of raising the women's budget to meet the men's rather than lowering the men's. This practical solution to the playing budgets is another important point to note, because one of the issues that came up repeatedly from some existing men's fans was whether the introduction of equality would mean that those who had benefited from inequality would now be short-changed. We could reassure them that they wouldn't be, and introduce the slogan which now stands proudly under the TV gantry at the Dripping Pan, thanks to a grant from the local town council: equality is a rising tide that lifts all boats. So they can shut up. No, I've had enough.
I love that quote. I think it's brilliant.
Well, it's true, and you know, we've proven it at Lewes. With Equality FC, we've got more sponsorships, we've got more owners, we've got a £750,000 state-of-the-art hybrid pitch that the men are very pleased about because of the work on the women's side. We've got international head. We've had so much success with it that it's literally proved that equality makes things better for everybody. If you're willing to do it, and do it with detail and strategic attention to detail, because how you market women is not how you market men. Now, don't just replicate what you're doing on the men's side, or you won't succeed. See them as different, and everybody wins.
You've done such an amazing job. You had a great team behind you. You had a couple of people who were in there before you. And it's because Charlie's in the room as well. I don't know if it's okay to ask, but obviously this suggestion actually came from two men, didn't it? When they came to you and asked. Tell us a bit about that.
I think this is really important because people often say football is like a microcosm of society, and it's such a good example of how patriarchy actually works. And if you take football as an example, you can look at other male-dominated professions like politics or STEM, in fact, most professions, right? We don't need to go through them. And you can think, how did we change it in football? Could we apply the same lessons? So it's really important to know that two men started this. I don't think women could have started it from within football, where men have the power and the voice. So two men started it, and they started it because the women's team were doing so well. And they thought, well, two things, really. Lewes FC is community owned, therefore it's a community asset for the whole community, not just people with penises, right? And also, Lewes FC women were doing brilliantly. How could they justify not paying these women properly? How could they justify making them pay, in some cases, to play, to get to matches, their gym membership, you know, to get to away matches, hotels? You know, why would you do this when these women are amazing athletes and the men are being paid for?
So let's give it up for Ed and Charlie. Male allies, more of them. So you didn't know much about football. You went in completely 100% or 110% focused by the sounds of it to do this. You made some incredible changes and progress, and you had so many ideas. I know that when you read this, you can feel the imposter syndrome just playing all along when you're talking about what it was like going into a board meeting, what it was like meeting and not recognizing players, not knowing the rules and all of that. It took a long time to to pick that up, you definitely felt a bit uncomfortable and not really that you should be there. And to add on, you were hitting menopause at the same time and still you did this.
So what I actually always have said about this is that it wasn't necessarily imposter syndrome. So I reframed that because I was an imposter. It was not a syndrome. I literally was somewhere that I shouldn't be. I didn't know. I was in a football club boardroom. I couldn't have told you the offside rule. I couldn't have told you who Ronaldo was. You know, I couldn't tell you what Arsenal did in 19 whatever. They all could, yeah. So I was an imposter, but I felt that I was a useful addition to the search for unwelcome women because I knew what it felt like. And with a football club, I think it's really important that you feel that you belong when you go there. So if you're used to having oat milk in your tea or coffee, and if you're not into beer, I'm not saying that all women aren't, by the way. If you're a bit dubious about football because you thought it was all men and stuff like I did, or if you like other things like art or, you know, reading or something, other things, I wanted the football club to have signs and signals around it that related to those other things. So we had Prosecco on tap, you know, we've got the oat milk, we've got breastfeeding area, we've got statue of female bisexual pirates from the 18th century, we've got pop art, you know, all these things that might mean that if you were coming along because someone had persuaded you, maybe in solidarity with gender equality, that you would come again, so you would be a sticky customer, yeah. So it wouldn't. So I used the imposter feeling, or knowing I was an imposter or an outsider, to add diversity to the board in terms of inclusion. But yes, I felt awkward, and yes, I felt I couldn't join in all the time, and that was difficult. But then I had the outside support of all these women that were coming in that were similar to me. And I knew that they resonated and they related to me and they made me feel normal, you know, even if I felt weird in the boardroom. Yeah.
I find it incredible, but because you all could see so clearly the benefits of this and how needed it was. And you were progressing, you were driving, you were gaining bigger crowds, you were getting more members, you changed everything to the better. And still there were some people who they were just pushing back. Mm. That must have been really, really hard and a bit demoralizing.
I mean, it definitely was. And I think it speaks to how difficult it is to change a system that's really coded for men. So it's so hard because you have to work 24/7 to do it. Otherwise, it keeps reverting back to the norm. So it's something you have to look out all the time. So you're in discussions in the boardroom, and if you don't bring in gender equality, bring in women, or just note that something is default male, no one else is necessarily going to, because it doesn't grate with them. You know, it doesn't grate because they've normalized it. I always say that sexism is the wallpaper of football. So wallpaper is there all the time, but you never notice the wallpaper. So it's not that anyone is horrible, right? It's not that these are mean people, and it's not that they're trying to exclude women. It's just that they're not thinking about it. And in the book, you've got practical examples of that and how it works and how you have to always be on guard to sort of say, well, no, you can't just say the vets. You mean the men's vets, because there are the women's vets as well. Vets as in not in the animal doctors, but the over 35s players at Lewes. You know, just things like you just have to keep mentioning, you know, that. So... yeah, but yes, it is probably surprising because even economically we proved that it would work. But unfortunately there are people, and they are men, fans of the men's game normally, who just don't believe it and see football as a sanctuary for them as men. And they feel, this is why I called it like with the funny bee, like it's an ironic joke really, but I really think some men see it like that. Like a bitch invasion. And no matter what you prove or what you do, I think they always will.
I've got so much I want to talk to you about, but we're kind of running out of time. But I just wanted to read a quote again here, which is by Simone de Beauvoir. Her wings are cut, and then she's blamed for not knowing how to fly.
That's in relation to women footballers? Yeah, the offside rule. Yeah, so, yeah, I know what I talk about in this chapter. One of the things I set up was an evening for new fans of football where they could come and ask questions. Nothing was too silly. Nothing would be judged. And when I suggested it on the board, all these male board members said, yes, I'll come and I'll give them the answers. And I said, well, that's sort of called mansplaining, guys. And then we have a discussion on what mansplaining is on a football club board, which I don't think many football club boards have those discussions, you know. So I said it has to be female players or female coaches that come in and explain to these new fans. And I'm not going to say they're just women. They probably will be. But there might be some men too that have been put off, you know, the potential toxic masculinity in men's matches. So, and they'll explain it. And I think one of the reasons I write this quote is because you've banned women from football. You've bullied us out of football. You've made it almost impossible for girls to play football. You've made it so that there's no money in it for women, so that they don't get the right medical care, they don't get the right support. And then you say, well, it's rubbish and I don't want to watch it. You know, really, guys, really, you know, it's almost, you can't make this stuff up, can you? It's so, it's what I call male football privilege, which is so narrow and only looks in a certain direction. But yeah, that quote kind of sums up the lot of women footballers, really.
What's next? You started on another book.
No, I haven't, but I'm really interested. There's a couple of articles that I'm writing at the moment I'm really getting my teeth into, which are kind of spin-offs from this. One is about women's football culture, which I see as a third space socially. Like, it's amazing. It's like being at a festival if you're in a big sort of very unlike men's football culture. And the other one is about, I think it's quite interesting, it's about, because what I used to do, I did so many things there because we were all really hands-on. If there were new women players to sign, I'd take a photo, you know, on my phone as a signing photo. And so the tendency was to, you know how men footballers, you know, they'll stand up, and then there's that, and then there's me thinking, well, how do you stand? Like, I'd be doing a bit of modelling accidentally. And there must be a middle way, right? So they don't have to replicate the men, but they don't have to be within the male gaze and objectify themselves. So I find this really interesting, and I've worked with a couple of players, and it's about agency. So I really want to write about that and have examples of photos and things like that, of how you can find this middle way between being objectified and being an agent in your own life, but not necessarily having to aid men. Yeah, so I'm just writing some more things that I'm really interested in and still volunteering at Lewes.
Here's the studio.
Yeah.
Let's do the shoot. Oh, amazing. I can recommend everyone to read this book. It's informative. It's very personal.
Well, I used to be a counsellor. I'm very open and it's very honest.
But it's very lovely. It's very well written as well. You've done a fantastic job, and I hope you do write more books, because we'd like to read them. And I know you got some cards with you if people want to. We've got 9 books here signed by Karen. So if anyone wants to buy a book, they're £20, and we'll sort that after. But I can just say thank you so much to both of you now. Thank you for coming. Well done. And let's give them a fantastic, huge applause again.